Beginning his military career when he was just a boy, Horatio Nelson would go on to become one of the greatest naval commanders in history. Nelson was fearless and made a career out of defying orders, but in the end it was his stubborn defiance that led to his downfall. Despite his dashing image, Nelson was a complex man and actually held one quite reprehensible belief that many would find shocking today. Horatio Nelson was born in 1758 in Norfolk, England. His journey in the Navy would begin early when he served on the HMS Raisonnable when he was only 12 years old. It was during his early years at sea that he discovered that he suffered from the most surprising ailment, seasickness, and he would have it for the rest of his life. In 1773, Nelson requested to join a daring expedition to the Arctic under the command of Constantine Phipps in search of the Northeast Passage. During this trip, he first demonstrated qualities that he would be famous for later in life: brash and daring. Upon seeing a polar bear nearby, Nelson gave chase across the ice surrounding their halted ship. According to the young Nelson, he had wanted the bear's skin for his father. His first battle occurred in 1775, 2 years after being transferred to the HMS Seahorse. With the Royal Navy backing the East India Trading Company against the Maratha Confederacy, Nelson's ship made contact with two of Sultan Hyder Ali's vessels before quickly sending them packing. Taking a trip to London in 1777, Nelson's ambitions reached higher when he took his lieutenant's examination. While his passing was in no doubt due to his skill and intelligence, it also didn't hurt that his uncle was on the examining board. In 1784, Nelson served on the HMS Boreas and was sent to Antigua, where he helped to impose the Navigation Acts, which meant seizing American ships. During this time enforcing the law, Nelson made many enemies, especially from those who felt they were unfairly treated. Claiming that their ships were unlawfully seized, several American captains sued Nelson while he was in Antigua. The lawsuit brought against Nelson was nothing to be scoffed at. On the island of Nevis, several merchants backed the Americans' accusations, adding legitimacy to the case. Although he was held on his ship for 8 months, the judgment was eventually rendered in his favor, and he was off the hook. During his time on Nevis, Nelson found love amid the misery of his assignment and the legal issues that he faced. He knew of the Nisbet family's affluent reputation, and he began a courtship with their daughter, Frances, also known as Fanny. Luckily for him, her family adamantly supported the union. However, there were secrets beneath the surface. The Nisbet family's wealthy reputation was in fact a lie, and they also neglected to mention that Fanny herself was infertile. Eventually Nelson found out, but being already committed to the marriage, and as a man of reputation and honor, which would be in question if he broke it off, he followed through. Horatio Nelson and Frances Nisbet were married in 1787. Shortly after the marriage, Nelson found himself placed in reserve, which he wasn't exactly thrilled with. Longing for a command, he pulled every string he could, but with no results for years. However, in 1793, geopolitical tensions caused the Admiralty to return him to service with the HMS Agamemnon under his command. Soon after, France officially declared hostilities against England. Now at war, England desired to defeat the French forces in the Mediterranean, and Nelson was sent to Tunis under the command of Commodore Robert Lindsay. The Commodore tasked him with blockading Corsica's French garrison, along with the help of 4 other vessels. It was during this time that he would receive the first of multiple injuries. After capturing the town of Bastia in Corsica, Calvi was the last French fortress on the island. During the British attack on the fortress, Nelson's right eye was hit by debris when the French shot a nearby sandbag. With such a hazardous injury, Nelson had little choice but to retreat from the battle. The damage was so severe that he never fully recovered his full sight, but after he was bandaged up, he immediately returned to the battlefield. After a month, the siege was concluded and the French surrendered. As the Spanish and French were allies, both were enemies of England at the time. In 1797, a British fleet under Sir John Jervis intercepted a Spanish fleet coming from Cartagena. Nelson's new ship, the HMS Captain, came to aid in battle, but was told to stay in line. It was then that Nelson noticed that something was off. The British ships wouldn't be able to get into position in time to fight. Nelson then boldly broke formation and charged the Spanish vanguard. With the support of the HMS Culloden, Nelson engaged the Spanish ships. During the cannon fire, he came upon the ship San Nicolas, then boarded and successfully captured it. He then took a second Spanish ship, and by the end of the day, the Spanish fleet dispersed and retreated. This marked the first time a British flag officer led a boarding party in 300 years, and his bravery did not go unnoticed. While Nelson had defied his superiors' orders during the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, it was lucky for him as his actions led to Britain's victory. Because of this, Sir Jervis chose not to admonish Nelson and omitted the insubordination from his report. In a private letter, he said that Nelson, quote, contributed very much to the fortune of the day. Upon return to England, his actions granted him great renown and the honor of 2 new titles. Aside from becoming a Knight of the Bath, Nelson achieved the new rank of Rear Admiral of the Blue. Only a few months after his victory at Cape St. Vincent, Nelson readied to besiege and take Santa Cruz de Tenerife from the Spanish. In July 1797, Nelson led a squadron of 8 other vessels in the attack with his new flagship, the HMS Theseus. Unlike his previous battle, this time the British forces became overwhelmed, as Nelson had underestimated Spain's preparation. The British were defeated, and during the engagement, musket fire fractured Nelson's right arm. After returning to his ship, Nelson ordered that the doctor amputate his arm. This new injury would forever serve as a reminder of his failure and the cost of defeat. Despite this, Nelson did not receive blame for the failure of the mission. His reputation from Cape St. Vincent persisted, and many viewed him as a sacrificial hero after his injury. As a result, upon his return to England, the public welcomed him with praise and sympathy. 1 year later, Nelson was back in action again during the Battle of the Nile. Once again, he would be hurt. A splinter of iron from a French artillery shot struck his forehead, wounding him and covering his one good eye with a skin flap. Although he was very disorientated, the ship's doctor was able to patch him up, and he returned to battle and achieved victory. After this latest success, Nelson moved up the ranks once more. He received the title Baron of the Nile and continued to serve in his position for another year, during which he aided the army of Naples against the French. In 1799, he rose to the rank of Rear Admiral of the Red and eventually became the Mediterranean's senior officer. After a period in Naples, Nelson returned to the sea in 1800 under his new superior, the Viscount Keith. However, Nelson only became more difficult to work with, at times outright refusing or abandoning his orders, often to return to his mistress in Italy, the already married Lady Emma Hamilton. This new affair would prove an uncomfortable surprise once he returned home. While in England later that year, he was met with the now familiar cheers and admiration, being invited to several banquets in his honor. During one of these dinners, his wife Fanny and his mistress Emma met. The situation was made even more uncomfortable by Nelson's choice to ignore Fanny and devote himself entirely to Emma. Obviously, Fanny didn't approve of this, and she would eventually reach her limit. By Christmas of 1800, Fanny Nelson was fed up with her husband's impropriety and put her foot down. She called him out on his behavior and forced him to choose to be with either her or Lady Emma. Nelson, with his disdain for Fanny evident, refused to leave his mistress. As a result, he and Fanny separated. Shortly after Nelson's promotion to Vice Admiral of the Blue in 1801, Lady Emma gave birth to their daughter, Horatia. Nelson and Emma were still in their respective marriages, making their only daughter, and the only child Nelson would father, illegitimate. although he was now a new father, Nelson was soon back at sea. Despite the frustration of Nelson's superiors, his insubordinate nature continued to get results. In 1801, at the Battle of Copenhagen, when his ship received the signal to withdraw, Nelson claimed not to see it, intentionally bringing his telescope to his bad eye. Ignoring his orders, he pushed forward and forced the enemy into a truce. Once again, his resilience and strategic talent paid off. By 1805, Nelson received yet another promotion to Vice Admiral of the White. However, at this time, the situation of the war was growing more dire day by day. Not only was France preparing for a large-scale invasion of Britain, but the French fleet had combined with Spain's. Upon learning this, the Admiralty tasked Nelson to command the blockade of Cadiz, Spain, where the enemy fleets were located. Only a month after Nelson had joined the blockade with his new flagship, the HMS Victory, the time for the climactic battle arrived. British patrols had spotted the Spanish fleet trying to sail out to the west, and the next day, Nelson readied himself to engage the enemy. The following morning, Nelson ensured everything was in place according to the plans he had been developing for weeks. He ordered the fleet to battle stations and turned his ship to those advancing. The British fleet was nearly upon the enemy, and just as they were about to meet, Nelson received a suggestion from Captain Thomas Hardy. The captain advised Nelson to take off any decorations on his uniform that identified his rank, so he would be more difficult to spot. Nelson refused, stating that it was too late and that he wasn't afraid. Before the start of the battle, Nelson gave his famous message to the fleet: "England expects that every man will do his duty." Although the Spanish and French fleets outnumbered the British, he wasn't worried. He and Hardy fought valiantly, side by side in the ensuing battle. In the chaos, a French sharpshooter hit Nelson, with a musket ball passing through his shoulder, lung, and spine. This time, he was in no condition to carry on fighting. Even as Nelson's men carried him below deck, he continued to lead and even stopped to advise one of the crew. Seeing that there was nothing to be done to remedy the situation, Nelson called to see Captain Hardy one last time. Hardy, who had still been in the battle, joined him below deck and reported the surrender of several enemy ships, and the battle going in the favor of the British. As Nelson said his goodbyes, he pleaded with Hardy to ensure that Lady Emma would inherit everything. As a last farewell, Nelson wanted to express his friendship with Hardy and asked the captain to kiss him. Hardy obliged, kissing Nelson on the cheek, and after a moment, once again on his forehead. As he drifted off, Nelson continued to speak, but his voice had become thin and faint. Those around him heard him say, "Thank God I have done my duty."
For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factinate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details.
The battle had ended in a British victory, and Nelson had given his life for it. Naturally, England treated him with the same admiration they had while he was alive. In 1806, following the return of Nelson's body to England, many people came to pay their respects to Nelson lying in state. The funeral commenced with his procession being escorted by 10,000 service members and over 100 senior members of the Admiralty. Yet, despite all his accomplishments and the immense honor given to him, the government denied one of his last requests. Nelson and Emma's union was never official, and their scandal persisted even after his passing. Nelson would have been distraught had he known that the government actually barred her from attending the funeral, and even denied her and their daughter Horatia any inheritance. Despite Nelson's final wish to leave his possessions to Emma, the law only acknowledged his legitimate family as beneficiaries. Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson's impact on British history, and indeed on that of the world, lasted for centuries. Beyond the many monuments, songs, and even city names he inspired, numerous significant figures such as Winston Churchill would draw influence from his career. Of course, considering the time he inhabited, it's important to note his shortcomings as well. Although most considered Nelson a hero during and after his time, he was undoubtedly more complex beneath the surface. Aside from the relationship scandals in his life, he held one very reprehensible belief. He staunchly opposed the abolition of slavery. Although he reportedly treated slaves he met with relative decency, he was an outspoken opponent of abolition efforts and was also no fan of William Wilberforce, a key abolitionist in Britain. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.